like any society in the world, Bulgaria is composed of people that have interesting stories. Stories have beginnings, middles, and ends, but only when you think back about it. While you're having an experience, you don't think, I'm in the middle of a story. No, you don't even know that you're at the beginning of it. It's only when it's over that you be, that's an interesting story. What happened to me yesterday? The key thing is not to be afraid of your stories. First of all, sometimes we think of a big, huge community, a nation state, which is a fairly recent invention. There was no Bulgaria 150 years ago. There were people here who spoke Bulgarian language for well over 1,000 years. But one of the things that is so difficult to assess what happened to Jews in this part of the world is that there are big, huge stories that Bulgaria saved Jews. Well, not really. Who saved Jews were Bulgarians, specific human beings who had courage, who had intelligence, who were not going to be scared of what happened to them. Those stories need the investigation of scholars or people who are trained to separate out things that really happened from the stories that they heard from somebody that didn't see it happen, aren't so sure, but they've heard a story. For example, if I sit down and write a story about America as a place where we have only government by the consent of those who are governed, the big, great American idea. Well, first of all, we weren't the only people that had that idea. It was already 100 years before our revolution that John Locke was talking that way. But when we finally said so on the 4th of July in 1776, those people didn't really mean women. They really didn't mean the African slaves, and they surely didn't mean the people who had lived there in that part of the world for about 10,000 years before, minimum, before Columbus comes to that part, or Europeans go there. And the Europeans think, oh, well, we discovered, or Spain discovers, or Italy discovers, or France discovers, or England discovers America. No, it's crazy. There were people living there long, long before the Europeans got there. What happens after 1776 is a struggle. It's a conflict that has very, very different interpretations of what that important event means. Were Jews saved here? Of course, yes, that's the big story. But who did it? Why did they do it? To unlock those treasures in little, small, easy to digest stories enables people in the Balkans to learn about their responsibility to one another. Whether they're Greeks or Macedonians, and they give up their fight about the word Macedonia. You know, it's going on long enough now. It's okay to use the word without being hostile with one another. Or it's okay for Bulgaria and Macedonia to have a more fruitful transportation, communication, exchange of artistic events, cultural ways of understanding one another, that you stop the hostility over whether or not there's only one language or two languages, or are they really, well, there are different ways of saying things in Atlanta, Georgia than in New York. But we have a common language, and now we find out that there are more people in California who speak Spanish than English. The complexity of culture and society are very, very different from the lines that are drawn on maps by politicians to create a state. How we're governed may be in a way that includes participation by the ones who are affected by a government. That's what I mean by consent of the governed, the democratic idea. But if we just go by national slogans, the tendency is towards hostility, incivility, and warfare. That's a big male idea. Who is bigger? Who is stronger? Who has better weapons? And so the horse turns out to be a big, huge military advance, because a horse can go much faster than a human being who's running, or an emperor who's sending the troops out, marching one foot after the other. And they literally begin to measure the world by the number of feet that a soldier takes to get from Rome, I don't know, to along the path to come even to the Balkans, and then beyond the Balkans to Palestine and over through North Africa. So finally Rome is really a city that's ruling all of it.
I'd like to ask you as an opinion, knowing the Balkans,
yes,
knowing Bulgaria, and being an American, what I'm thinking, trying to explain to myself as a young person and yet not that young, how is that possible? How is that possible in such a difficult society as ours? It's difficult now. It was difficult then, in the 30s. How is that possible to save people and to kill them at one time? And one of the answers for myself is that, and then to try to forget the bad thing and just repeat the good thing, it's this feeling of uncertainty in your nation, in your society. It's this need for self-assurance that you are really great because you've done something really great. For you, do you understand this? Can you use this as an explanation why we are so reluctant to admit that yes, we saved them, but yes, we didn't have the sufficient strength to save them all? Or have you in your mind the root of this antinomy, of this dichotomy?
Well, there was a time in Bulgarian history in which representatives of the state were making claims that were false. For example, to say that Bulgaria was the only country that rescued Jews is false. It's not true. The Danes who involved themselves in an effort to rescue the Jews of Denmark did really remarkable things. So for a Bulgarian ambassador to be at a conference in Scandinavia and say, we were the only country who, when he's sitting next to the Danish ambassador, it's a little bit undiplomatic. It's not helpful to say such a thing in an international conference. And then, you know, quietly the Danish ambassador over coffee will say, well, you know, in the same year of 1943, there is another story of rescue that you need to learn about. And then next time you want to, we're the only ones who did this. But still, there were 5 words that Bulgarian representatives, because note that I'm not saying Bulgaria. Bulgaria is an abstraction. It's now the Republic of Bulgaria. Before that, it was a kingdom. And before that, it was a part of the world in an empire that was ruled by the Ottomans and so forth. But the way that Bulgaria wanted to be remembered for events in 1943 is we saved all our Jews. A very carefully thought through and written down in 5 words in English, we saved all our Jews. That way of thinking enables Bulgaria to feel really wonderful about itself. All Bulgarians should be proud of that, because there were Bulgarians who really did fantastically wonderful, noble, good things. But again, what do you mean by our Jews? Greater Bulgaria, that is to say Bulgaria at the time that Russia liberated this part of the world from Ottoman control had parts that looked out on the Aegean. And when those parts of the world come back under Bulgarian control, they're postage stamps that show, you know, a Bulgarian looking out on the sea, and it's a beautiful, you know, pose like that right on the postage stamp. Or you see a stamp with, and Boris is always on the stamp, you know, he's the king. You see a stamp of Ohrid in Bitola, Skopje, that's part of Bulgaria.
Yeah. So
you know, it's the way things always were and the way things always will be. But you didn't save, or I don't mean you or me. I was a little boy at the time. I did, you know, I didn't save anybody during World War II. I was only 4 years old when it ended. But did the United States save the Jews? We didn't. People explained to our leaders the desperate situation of Jews in Europe. Did the United States do enough to protect the Jews who are remnants after the war? Nearly 3 million Jews are still alive. They're in camps. They want to go somewhere. I see many pictures of people that met in the refugee camps, and weddings happen, and you see a bride in a white gown, you know, and in this place, it isn't a huge, beautiful thing, but she's wearing white, and her husband is there smiling at the camera, and she has a little American flag in her hand, because they wanted to get a visa to go to New York, or to go to Philadelphia, or Detroit, or something. We could easily, without any difficulty in the American economy, have absorbed 1 million Jews. We took 10,000. Then the 10,000 would be 20,000, and eventually 50,000. They would have done no harm to the American people, whatever. They would have enhanced doctors, philosophers, writers, just people who tell jokes. Can you imagine the world without Seinfeld or Groucho Marx? It'd be ridiculous. We need to laugh. At least 5 times a day, you need to laugh. I see you smiling now. Turn it into a laugh and it'll be good for you, because it will help you cope with pain and big questions like, how come we saved and we killed? To answer that question, you didn't do it. So there's no shame in admitting we saved and we killed. If by we, you mean all of your ancestors and the complexity of your relationship to those people, that's what happened. Some people survived, others were murdered. Others were treated cruelly, with some kind of animosity that Bulgaria did not invent. The hatred, the contempt for Jews is a very ancient story. It's one of the world's oldest hatreds. I can't tell you a good reason why. I think it's irrational. There is no good reason for it. I think it's despicable. I think it's horrible that people are hated because they're Jews. I think it's especially outrageous that they're killed because they're Jews. And that they're killed when they're little babies or old grandmothers because they're Jews. Over 1 million, 1,200,000, something like that, are the most dangerous of all Jews, the children, because according to the German mentality, they have the highest probability of living. They will live longer than someone like me who's 70 years old. I'm not going to live another 50 years. I'll be lucky if I live another 20 and see grandchildren. I don't have any grandchildren yet. I'd love to have grandchildren. My youngest daughter was just engaged last Sunday. It was a moment of enormous joy for my family. My second oldest daughter is already married, but no children yet. So we don't tell kids when to have a child or whether to have a child. Maybe that happens. Maybe I die before their grandchildren. But I surely don't expect my grandchild, if I ever have one, to be killed because he or she is Irish, or because we believe that Barack Obama is a wonderful president, for all of his failures. He's He's wonderful in many respects. That's my opinion. I don't expect to be killed because I said that. I know that there are many people in America who disagree with that strongly. But to have strong views, contending with one another, in conflict with one another, is perfectly normal for the human. It's not perfectly normal. It's not perfectly okay to hate someone because they are Catholic, or because they are Orthodox, or because they're an atheist, or because they are Jews, or something like that, a Muslim. That's what's crazy. And it's crazy for Bulgarians to think that it never happened here. We never had any hatred for Jews. We never had any anti-Semitism. Well, Belev didn't come out of nowhere. Belev was a nice little Bulgarian baby at one point. So was Gabrovsky. So was the king with all of his foxy maneuvers. That's what Hitler's animal that he compared King Boris to. He says he was a clever fox. I always learn out what's really happening when Boris comes to Berlin. Boris hated to go to Berlin. The king, I mean. You know why? Because his father lived there. And his father treated him like a little kid every single time he saw him, because he hated the idea that the British and the French made him abdicate the monarchy, and his young 23-year-old, or whatever, however old Boris was when he becomes king, he was always treated as inferior, less than his father, and he'd have this confrontation every single time he went to Berlin. He had to go see his dad. So he hated going there. Hitler loved it, because he'd find out what was really happening. Instead of depending on his intelligence, people telling him, you know, things are going well. So that when the general has to finally surrender the 6th Army in Stalingrad, Hitler is sending these crazy orders back. No, you never surrender. We're going to win the war. And ridiculous ideas. Who understood that Germany was not going to win the war? One of the very first people that understood that was King Boris III. And so if you factor before and after February the 2nd, 1943, that's when it becomes really puzzling for Bulgaria. You have a king who understands, I'm not so sure Germany's going to win this war. It's just surrendered the 6th Army to the Russians. And another way in which King Boris is clever is that he makes sure that not a single Bulgarian soldier serves on the Eastern Front. He remembers that Russia liberated Bulgaria from the Ottomans. And he knows that how close the language ties are, that Cyrillic begins here and goes to Moscow, and that Russians and Bulgarians are not speaking the identical same language, but they can understand one another. If you went to Moscow tomorrow morning and just spoke Bulgarian, and you said "Dobar den" instead of "Dobar utro," they'd understand. Well. They'd understand, you know, they'd get it, and you could talk to them, and bit by bit your Russian would improve and their Bulgarian would improve.
Not that easy, but it's possible, yes. And you say that it's a matter of civil society development to try not to make myths of yourself, but just to admit that, yes, we are good, but yes, we are evil too. And it's not that big shame.
You know, the idea of America in the British colonial period was that they wanted to send people from England to that part of the world to create a harmonious biracial society. That was the big idea. And the colony was called Virginia, after the queen, who was supposed to be a virgin. Maybe she was, I don't know, it's disputed. But she never got married and didn't have any children. So that Queen Elizabeth dies without children, and the Tudor family stops ruling in England, and the Stuarts come in. But the big idea is to show we English could do colonies and empire much better than those terrible Catholic Spaniards. We were going to show the world that everything would be harmonious and sweet and nice. All of that changed within years of the British settlers getting to Virginia, when the Dutch show up with African slaves. The question then becomes, who's in charge? Now there are three different groups, and they're described by the color of their skin. The dermatological difference is not the quality of their character, the capacity to understand anything, the way to admit a mistake and to correct your life with a misunderstanding becomes a higher understanding, a better way of thinking of things. Instead, it spirals in decline, away from the original idea, to one of the most brutal experiences of the modern period, namely the American idea of slavery. And it's directly in contrast to the idea of the American idea of freedom. So you have freedom and slavery going in completely opposite directions that are either destructive of civil society or enabling us eventually to elect the first African American president and to realize that racism in America is a present problem in 2012. It didn't go away with Martin Luther King. It didn't go away by ending the legal arrangements for slavery. We still had separation, segregation, contempt. So just as Bulgaria didn't invent anti-Jewish attitudes, you're not going to cure it all by yourself. You need to be in conversation with other Europeans and with people from Asia and from Africa and the two Americas, North and South, to find out how do you move past a period of your history that was both good and evil.
So two-sided. I liked yesterday your comparison with Janus. Janus, I don't know how you pronounce it. That's it. It's like
I still don't understand. With whom?
With this Roman god. Janus.
Oh, Janus. Yeah, I'm
yes.
sorry.
This
yeah,
is my
yeah.
favorite
Yeah,
Roman
right.
god.
January, we say.
Yes.
The Romans had gods for everything. Every day of the week, every month was named after a god.
This one is
and Janus, yeah.
clever and full with wisdom and message. So yes, it's just a matter of globalization to just admit that you have two sides, and it's not that uncommon. Every country has at least two.
You know, there's something really stupid about insisting that you never make a mistake. And especially in intimate personal relations, if one person is always right and the other person is always wrong, that gets old pretty quick. It destroys the intimacy and the friendship. And I can't even tell you what the fight was about, but I was involved in a very stupid argument with my wife, and I was insisting that I was right about that thing. And finally, she surrendered. You know, the way a soldier throws down the arms and just goes, she says, "Ed, you can be right. I'd rather be happy." And it was really an important turning point in our relationship because, you know, that's it. Do you want to be wiser, more intelligent, or you want to insist, I never make a mistake? Yes. You know, it's crazy.
It's a matter of wisdom.
To take the time to reflect on which of your insights, your understandings, is really persuasive. That usually happens when you're able very calmly and serenely to explain it to somebody else. But to go back to Stockholm, if your president or some ambassador is saying, we're the only country in Europe that ever saved Jews, well, you say, well, thank God the Berlin Wall fell. Now that you can travel, you can actually meet other Europeans, and you can discover what happened in the 1940s that wasn't just in the official state newspaper of Bulgaria for all those years when Todijifov was telling you that he's the one who saved all the Jews here. Or, you know, the Israeli Jews who said, oh, it must be the king. All kinds of myths and legends grow up when you don't get access to good information. So the first thing is always get access to information. Be attentive. Listen up. Read everything you can, no matter what the topic is.